Good evening, everyone. My name is Shelley Repp. On behalf of the Committee of 100 of the Federal City, I want to welcome you to this evening's conversation on creating an equitable neighborhood park system. The committee was founded over 100 years ago to sustain and safeguard the fundamental values of the L'Enfant and Macmillan plans that give the nation's capital much of its distinction and beauty. Our parks are an important component of those plans. Today, our all-volunteer membership is active citywide on a wide variety of issues. A booklet describing our history is on the table in the lobby. Feel free to pick one up and take it home with you. During 2023, our centennial year, we decided to mark that milestone by holding a series of what we called conversations that focused on some of our city's issues. Tonight's conversation is part of that series, continuing series. All have been recorded and can be found on our YouTube channel. Information on the YouTube channel is included in the program that's on your chairs. We have three speakers this evening: Rachel Clark, Becky Strauss, and Mark Simpson. I will provide a brief intro before each speaker, but more complete bios are in the program. We've reserved time for questions after the three speakers have spoken. To ask a question, please come up to the mic to ask. Please keep your questions brief so that there's time for others to ask questions. The moderator of the Q&A is Dennis Chestnut, who is co-chair of the Committee of 100's in Parks and Environment Subcommittee. After the program, please join us in the lobby for refreshments and conversation. Committee of 100 members are identified by badges like I have right here. We invite you to talk with any of us to learn more about our organization. We welcome new members. Okay, our first speaker is Rachel Clark. Rachel is an independent policy strategist and researcher focused on health and sustainability, who, while at George Washington University's Sumner Redstone Global Center for Preservation and Wellness, authored Neighborhood Park Service, a seminal report on DC's parks. Please welcome Rachel.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here and for having me. I'm excited to talk to you all about DC's parks, an issue very near and dear to my heart. And thank you, Shelley, for the introduction. So as he said, I'm a researcher and policy strategist focused on really the intersection of climate and health, and look at strategies such as food systems, the built environment, green space, parks, and transportation to achieve improvements in those areas. And so while I was at GW, at the School of Public Health, we took a look at DC's park system and areas where we could maximize its potential, and we released this report, Neighborhood Park Service, which was looking at what federal control of the park system has meant for the experience of residents on the ground with the park system. So I think this is probably not news to anyone, but the reason we care about parks from a public health perspective is that they're a major public health resource, and they've been shown through robust evidence to reduce stress and promote mental health, to strengthen social ties and foster community resilience, promote physical activity, of course, and then provide a range of ecosystem and environmental benefits as well. But these benefits are only fully realized when parks are welcoming and used by people and center communities and are accessible. So that's an important principle that we were keeping in mind as we did our research. So our report, which Neighborhood Park Service, was the first of its kind looking at how the federal control of DC's park system affects how the parks are experienced in the city. We interviewed dozens of district residents, people from community organizations, staff from local and federal agencies, and BIDs and other quasi-governmental agencies as well. And we reviewed government reports and plans from both the federal and local agencies. And our report details the unique history of DC's park system. It's the only place like it, and what that has meant, and how it's worked, and challenges it's created, and then offer some recommendations for how we think some of these challenges could be addressed. For those who aren't familiar, this is a map of the jurisdictional division of DC's park system. This is from DPR's Ready to Play master plan. It shows how the vast majority of the park system is still under federal control. So the darker green is federal parkland, mostly NPS. It also includes the Arboretum, which is under the USDA. And then the light green is local parkland run by DPR. What this means is that NPS runs about 6,500 acres, and that includes, of course, big parks that we know, like Rock Creek Park and the Mall, and it also includes hundreds of tiny sites. 2/3 of NPS parks in the city are under 1 acre. And then at the same time, DC's Department of Parks and Recreation has about 850 acres. And because of this unusual division of jurisdiction, DPR is a very unusual city parks department. It's mostly a recreation department, and it doesn't have a parks division or a natural resources division like you'd see in other cities. And its maintenance functions, the park maintenance functions actually aren't under DPR. They're in yet another agency, the Department of General Services. So just they don't have a very robust parks capacity within the Department of Parks and Recreation, even though it's in the name. And then just briefly, NPS's jurisdiction is actually further divided up. The parks are divided into superintendencies or administrative units, and there are actually 6 of them in DC. 3 of them just have a little bit of land in the city, but then there are 3 major ones. The middle blue one is the National Mall and is sort of the downtown parks. Rock Creek Park is up in the northwest, and then the National Capital Parks East is the eastern half of the city, and that superintendency also includes a lot of acreage in Maryland. Like I said, we did this research and issued our findings in this report and found that this division creates a number of challenges for fully realizing the potential of the park system. So I'm gonna run through these kind of quickly now. The first one that we heard from everyone, with varying experiences, was that NPS's statutory mission, which is their legal mandate, which is to preserve natural and historic resources for the enjoyment of this and future generations, is often in direct conflict with what the needs of an urban park system are. And so that makes it difficult for communities to activate the parks in response to community needs, and often puts the NPS's priorities at odds with the priorities of district residents. For example, the mission is sometimes in conflict with very common urban park amenities such as playgrounds, dog parks, community gardens, and then even, this may be surprising, like nature trails, accessible natural areas, which are commonly requested amenities in DPR's master plan. And then also because of NPS's statutory mission, they're really not set up to manage urban parks because that's not what they're for in the rest of the country, and so aren't well set up to respond to the rapidly changing needs of an urban population. We also heard a lot about jurisdictional confusion. People don't know if their little triangle park is a federal park, a local park, who takes care of it if it's local, which superintendency it's in if it's federal. And this creates confusion for residents, it creates confusion for government, and just makes it, and for park partners, and just makes it hard to achieve progress on the parks. Also, because the park system is so divided, there isn't one entity that's in charge of thinking about the park system holistically. And this is important because, as the Trust for Public Land has found in its keys for a highly effective park system, the number 1 key is a clear expression of purpose. And the way we're set up in DC right now, there's not really anyone to make that clear expression of purpose. And because of NPS's divisions, They don't really do citywide park planning, and DPR does do park planning, but they don't own or manage most of the land. So even if they put forth some recommendations for where the park should go, they're limited in how much they can do. And something surprising we heard was that even though the two jurisdictions work together a lot on parks, there isn't actually a structure in place for consistent coordination to bring everyone together on a regular basis and like make sure everyone's on the same page. More challenges. Everyone we spoke to, federal, local, governmental, non-governmental, agreed that NPS is severely underfunded, both nationwide and in the district specifically, and that hasn't gotten better since we issued this report. NPS has a pretty significant deferred maintenance backlog in the district. At the time we released the report, the estimate was as high as $1.9 billion. Now it's more like 1.6. That's just because of how they count, not because we've paid that off. And that puts us at if you're comparing state by state, right now I believe we're the third highest state in terms of deferred maintenance across the country. And because of this limited funding, NPS doesn't have the capacity to cover the maintenance needs of this big park portfolio. And as a result, we see sites that are neglected, maybe things are broken, outdated, and resulting in spaces that don't necessarily feel welcoming or have ways to use them. And this funding is a driver of inequity because the budget is determined by visitation. So, of course, the National Mall and Monument Superintendency has the highest budget, and there are lower budgets for the parks outside the core. And then also because the agency doesn't have enough funding to cover all of its needs, there's a reliance on outside partnerships and philanthropy, and that also means that certain neighborhoods are more able to support the parks than others. We also heard a lot about issues with communication and accountability. District residents feel like they're not able to communicate about what they need and want from their neighborhood green spaces, and they don't know who to call. As I said before, there's this confusion about jurisdiction. And even when they do, communication is challenging because NPS has limited capacity for community engagement and doesn't have like a platform for service requests, and they're not built into the local DC government's 311 platform either. And then there's an accountability issue, which is not in any way the agency's fault, just a structural one that, of course, as a federal agency, they don't work for us, right? They respond to the federal administration, and the district officials, elected officials, can't do oversight of NPS the way that they would do for local agencies. So they can't be brought in for an oversight hearing or be required to provide information in the way we might see for a local agency. And then the final issue that we heard a lot about was just that the current policies and procedures, which really reflect the regulations that the agency is subject to, are often difficult for residents to work with. Policies prevent community-desired park uses, like limitations on concessions, light after dark, installations, and the permitting process is considered to be very challenging. So together, these challenges make it difficult to sustain an integrated, activated park system that serves the needs of urban communities in DC, and it remains a park system of great, not fully realized potential. We did offer some recommendations to address some of these challenges, and these are divided up by different audiences. So recommendations for the district and NPS to work on together, some recommendations from NPS that we heard from residents, and then for Congress. Our number one recommendation for the district is to expand its parks capacity and to have a designated office within DPR to oversee parks, to think about the district's interest in federal parks and that coordination, planning, oversight, and expand the district's parks management capacity, including planning and maintenance capabilities. We also recommend that the district establish a Parks Advisory Board or a Parks Coalition that could serve as a coordinating body for all of these different organizations and agencies that touch parks to work more regularly together and provide long-term direction for the park system. And then we recommend establishing a Parks Equity Conservancy that could leverage district funding, philanthropic funding to support park spaces across the whole city in an equitable way, and provide technical assistance to communities that are looking to activate and maintain their local green space. Recommendations for NPS and the district together is to put together a joint action plan on management. So to really think about looking at this whole park system, which parks make sense as federal parks and which parks make more sense as local parks, and think through what the management of those parks should be together. And identify lands that would be appropriate for transfers of jurisdiction, cooperative management agreements, or other shared maintenance agreements. The district and NPS could also do a lot more to share information, come up with a common understanding of who owns what and who's responsible for everything, and provide greater transparency to the public. Work together to develop a coordinated approach to service requests, potentially by integrating NPS into 311, and then working together on an online permitting system. Some recommendations for NPS that we really heard when we talked to residents were to simplify the permitting and partnership process. We also thought that the agency might consider revising its administrative boundaries. Right now it has 3 big superintendencies. It might be simpler if they had one that was more sort of the mall and national parks, and then a superintendency that is more local facing rather than having 3. And then increasing community engagement. People really wanted to have stronger connections between the community and NPS, and to prioritize local use of parklands in their management plans. And then finally, recommendations for Congress are to explore transferring ownership of those really local parks to district control. And this would both allow the ones that are more appropriate for local control to be under local, and then relieve the cost of maintaining those parks from NPS. And then we recommend that Congress increase funding for urban NPS parks, particularly in DC, and establish an urban parks division or some way of having a slightly different set of regulations apply to urban parks that takes into account the unique needs of parks in an urban environment versus the more natural and historic portfolio that NPS manages. So that, I think I lost a slide. There we go. So that's the report in a nutshell. If you're interested in reading more, it's available at this link. And I'm also happy to answer questions if you want to reach out to me by email after this. And of course, we can talk tonight too. So thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Our next speaker is Becky Strauss, Director of Economic Initiatives at the Federal City Council. Becky is staffing the Federal City Council's Parks Task Force that is exploring issues with park administration. She'll tell us more about this task force. Please welcome Becky.
Hoping I could walk around a little bit, but that's fine. So building off of Rachel's report, actually, her report was the foundation for launching this DC Parks Task Force. And just to provide a little bit more background, DC has a very strange way of doing parks. I think that's one of the main takeaways from Rachel's report. No other city in America has our setup, where basically the National Park Service runs our parks. The DC government only runs rec centers and playgrounds, okay? We don't have a parks department, and that's weird. We should have a parks department, okay? I would also say well, let me provide a little bit more history of how that came to be. Home Rule Act in the early 1970s. So before the Home Rule Act, DC municipal government had very little control over much of the city. So when the DC government was essentially created, the question of what to do with parks was sort of left for later, and a lot of that parkland was just left with the Park Service. It wasn't a long-term solution. And I think now is a great moment to update the way the city does its park system. I know that the current Trump administration, the National Park Service, they're looking for ways to save costs. I know that the DC government is more excited about taking more control over land within its borders. Also I would say, DC always ranks really well when it comes to parks, and Mayor Bowser often brings us up. So the Trust for Public Land ranks DC as #1 in the country, and she's very proud of that. But the thing is, and I think, Rachel, you can provide a little more detail, but that mostly has to do with the availability of park land close to where people live, right? And so it's less about, say, the quality of the parks and more about, in some ways, like a natural asset that's been in the city for a very long time. And it's a lot of federal land, okay? So there's this great opportunity to sort of like think of a new vision for the city and its parks. And that's, I think, the main motivation for this task force. And actually, there are several people here tonight who are serving on the task force. And there were, 35 stakeholders involved, from bids, from ANCs, local parks activists, representatives from DC government agencies. So really a broad cross-section of everyone involved in parks in the city. It met 7 times. The co-chairs were Tony Williams, former mayor of DC, Nina Albert, the deputy director for economic development in the city, and Matt Fruman, who's on the DC Council. So over the course of a year, more or less, we brought in outside experts, someone from Chicago, someone from Minneapolis, someone from Memphis to talk about their systems. We hired the Trust for Public Land to do some research on best practices. We also convened a working group to look at the costs of all of this. Because if the city is going to take on a lot more parkland, there has to be a way for the city to pay for it. So some of the main takeaways. The Trust for Public Land found that the best park systems in the country generally have one centralized park agency. DC doesn't. The best park systems have one citywide nonprofit that usually works with the park system to fundraise, do strategy, and sort of serve as a booster for city parks. DC does not have one. The best park systems also usually have dedicated park funding for its parks. DC does not. That means DC Parks and Rec funding is part of the annual appropriations process, okay? So it's not protected. And also, they discovered that interagency coordination generally is really difficult in any city. And so in DC, as Rachel was talking about, parks management is separated among tons of different city agencies. And that's just hard, okay? It's hard to deliver good services when that's a setup. So the task force developed a set of recommendations, which should be published sometime next year. And I would say the main takeaways are, we have to figure out which parks make the most sense for disposition from the federal government. There are lots of different park sizes, different park costs, and we've got to be really strategic about that. And we know that we have to do more work on what exactly the right organization, so if the DC government's going to take all these parks, we've got to think about the organization of the DC government. And I think that Rachel's done a lot of work on that and in her report. So we know we got to make progress there. How would we create a true parks department? And also for the cost of parks, We know that DC, not only is there not dedicated funding for parks, we don't raise a lot of money from the use of parks. It's called cost recovery. When you sort of rent out space, sports fields, or if there are weddings, for example, or concessions. DC just doesn't do that in a serious way. Only 5% of the DC Parks budget comes from cost recovery. The national average is 21%. So even just that, right? And it doesn't have to sacrifice access and equity while also making more money, charging for things like weddings, right? So there's a lot of money there the city could use to pay for parks. And also, we've been exploring an opportunity to have more community management of parks, and Casey Trees, I know Kelly is here from Casey Trees, but we've been working with them to see how they can get plugged in to help local communities working with ANSIs to manage their own parks. Those are the main ones? Rachel's serving on the task force, of course, so I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. I think that we want to, well, I think that's about it. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Well, thank you to Becky. Okay, our final speaker is Mark Simpson, Director of Planning and Economic Development at the Downtown Business Improvement District. Mark will review the downtown bids, efforts to activate downtown parks owned by the National Park Service, including Franklin Park. Please welcome Mark.
This is that one? Okay, great. All right, hello everyone. We'll see if this is kind to me. Thank you, Shelley. Thank you to everyone in the Community 100 for inviting us and allowing, or inviting me and allowing the bid to participate. I'm very excited about this topic. It's very, oh, louder. Okay, pardon me. Is that a little better? Thank you, everyone. My name is Mark Simpson. As Shelley said, I'm the Director of Planning and Economic Development for the Downtown DC bid. I am very focused on downtown revitalization efforts writ large, and so my work touches a broad array of topics, including our public realm and how we can utilize the public realm to better encourage foot traffic, visitation, and to people to come downtown, enjoy downtown, and stay downtown. So just a brief note about bids. For those who don't know, the Business Improvement District, we're a quasi-governmental agency. Effectively, the property owners within our boundary agree to a supplemental assessment. The bid then provides additional services on their behalf, and we then, are there to increase residential and business attractiveness, and then also act as a opportunity and way to connect our private sector members or public residents, whoever, to available governmental services. The bid itself was founded in '97. There's a bit of history about bids here. Our bid was founded in 1997 concurrently with the opening of what was then the MCI Center, now the Cap One Arena. And so we've been in continuous operation since then. We like to say that we're the first bid in DC. Technically, the Golden Triangle bid was incorporated before we were, but we started operations first, so we say we were the first. There's a suite of bids throughout the district, and we're excited to welcome another bid in Congress Heights that has been proposed in this most recent council session. Bids play a very important role in connecting communities, providing services, and advocating for the members of a specific area. And as we'll get into later, I think bids are also very, very well positioned to answer a lot of the questions or provide a lot of the services, fill the gap that were identified earlier by Rachel. So this is our boundary, just to level set for everyone. So we are about 140 square blocks, about 530 properties. Main points of interest include, of course, the arena, the Portrait Gallery, the Convention Center, Federal Triangle, and we, of course, have a collection of just the kinds of public spaces that Rachel was referring to. NPS-owned parcels, a variety of them that are largely not maintained by NPS, but a lot of that falls to the bid and our operations team to keep them looking good and maintaining them in good shape. So many of you might already be familiar with our core services, but really the base of the pyramid is clean and safe. We maintain our parks and public spaces, the kind of work that I do in terms of economic development, attraction, retention, data reporting, et cetera. We operate the Downtown Day Services Center, which is located in the Presbyterian Church on 14th and New York Avenue. We also put on a wide array of events. I encourage everyone to go to our website and see our calendar. And then we also tell the story about the neighborhood through various marketing and communication channels. I wanted to sneak in one slide about visitation. So this is related-ish, but we very closely monitor foot traffic and visitation of the bid. I know there's been a lot of interest about what's been happening with the federal government. And so what you're looking at here in the top right is a graph showing average daily visits to the bid. So on average, in 2024, we had about 190,000 people just coming to the bid every day. It varies by season and day and time of year. Through 2025, overall visitation was up about 3% plus or minus. So we were averaging about 200,000 visitors a day. So it was good to see that progress. But then if you look at, the text might be a little tiny, but for August and September, you can see the numbers at the top of the bar are the year-over-year changes. And so September and in August and September, we saw actually a decline in visitation relative to 2024. So we think that's largely attributable to the surge, federal actions, as we like to call them. And then the thing that I really want to point out is on the bottom right there, that's the year-over-year change looking by month and the comparison between commuters and visitors. So, a worker commuter coming down versus a visitor. And if you look at in March, when the return to office mandates came back, we saw a huge jump in commuter traffic, right? We were about 5% year over year in January and February, and then it bumped up in March to about 25%, huge jump, right? But then if you look at the blue line, which is our visitation line, that shows it's been on a steady decline since the start of the new year, and really it's been very striking since the federal surge, the huge drop that we've seen. So this is just table setting just to say getting people downtown is crucially important, and I think it's one of the main roles that the bid has to make a welcoming environment for people to be in. And so, of course, having world-class parks and public spaces is key to making that vision a reality. The bid commissioned a Parks Master Plan in 2023. It was the first one that our bid put together. And as far as I understand, it was the first time that we've actually cataloged all of these little federal holdings that Rachel was alluding to. So at the end of the day, we produced a plan that identified everything in the inventory, and there were over 30 spaces totaling 27 acres. So yeah, less than an acre per space, right? A lot of these little bow ties, certainly parks and plazas, and then other just streetscape spaces that you would look at and think, hey, this is just a DDOT right of way. But this is what the map looks like, and so you can see spread throughout. The couple, the larger spaces are Franklin Park, McPherson, the traffic circles, and then John Marshall Park as an example, and then just a collection of these tiny little leftover spaces. So Franklin Park is one of our key focal points and really the sort of green jewel emerald at the heart of the bid. I hope everyone here has spent time in Franklin Park in the most recent, it's a phenomenal space. So very innovative public-private partnership between the district government, the bid, and the federal government. The district paid for a renovation. The park gets hundreds of thousands of visitors annually, and we were able to, as part of this process with the district and the federal government, incorporate elements into these park spaces that would have been sort of unimaginable under the previous existing kind of framework with NPS, right? So we have a playground, we have a splash pad, we revived the fountain, really tremendous space. We're very proud of it. This is I hope everyone enjoys an org chart, but I wanted just to highlight how long this process took, right? With initial conversations starting in 2012. The deal required an act of Congress. So that was shepherded by our Representative Norton and the support of her office. And then the park, once we had the approval to proceed, construction and opening moved a lot faster after the paperwork is done. And so what I try to do here is just lay out like the nature of the agreement. And so what you effectively have is the National Park Service owns the land. There is what's called a cooperative management agreement, the CMA, with the district. And then the bid, we have a memorandum of understanding with the district government. And effectively, we're effectively sort of the district's a pass-through entity. So NPS says, yes, you can build this, but you are responsible for maintenance. You are responsible for any of the replacement of like the playground breaks or the pump for the fountain, what have you. And then the district kind of turns around and push those obligations to the bid, which we're happy to take on to actually implement and ensure that the space is well kept and maintained. Additionally, we still have some connections to NPS. So we have a philanthropic agreement, similar to what Rachel had mentioned, and then also there's an annual work plan. So we're submitting to them once a year. So we have close coordination with NPS. And then once we're working very closely with a cafe operator to get the cafe open, they will hold a lease, or we will hold a lease with them to operate in the space. So I would say at a very high level, the plan the framework that we have is significantly improved against the status quo because it does allow for things like we can maintain the park. The bid, we employ safety and maintenance ambassadors. So we are fully within our rights to do the kind of regular maintenance and upkeep. We have some advantages in terms of events and activations. Crucially, we're permitted to enforce the park rules, which is very important. There's frequently like a jurisdictional problem between NPS, park police, and MPD if things happen. And so we, as the bid, have the ability to enforce, and when we can't enforce ourselves, and MPD can be a resource there. And then finally, there is revenue potential. The CMA, the Cooperative Management Agreement, talks about opportunities for revenue. The sort of grand vision and plan was that the revenue from events in the cafe would pay for the increased operations and maintenance. And then I would say as a drawback or on the potential challenges, or as we're thinking about how we're building this new model going forward, or if there are new opportunities, there are significant cost liabilities. I mean, these parks are expensive to maintain. We employ 4 full-time SAMs, safety and maintenance ambassadors, who are 100% dedicated to Franklin Park. And that doesn't even include landscape maintenance contracts, right? Capital replacement if things break. It is a significant investment that the bid puts out to maintain the space. Additionally, the permitting requirements, there's some avenue for easing the way in which we get things permitted, but it still goes through the normal process. And it can be really challenging. It's sort of unclear what you can do when, who approves what, does CFA need to get involved? And that kind of uncertainty can make it really difficult for planning. And then ultimately what that leads to is then the idea and the vision of having, the wedding or the large-scale event becomes much more difficult when the permitting framework is uncertain. So it makes it hard for us to be able to make a commitment to a third party to have an event come because we don't really have final say in what happens in the park. I'll just say as an anecdote too, I've heard that, and the NPS permitting department is where careers go to die, unfortunately. And so it's oftentimes, it just is hard to get things through. I want to talk about other future opportunities, and Other plans, there's been lots of work and study in this. Some in the room might be aware of the Small Parks Management Strategies Plan that the NPS put out in 2017. So this was an inventory that NPS did of their holdings in the district. What was interesting is that they scored all of them based on how mission aligned they were, quote unquote. And so they looked at things like, was it part of the original LaFont plan, right? Does it have a memorial in it? And they made a recommendation in this like helpful pie chart that says, high, medium, low. They identified it. I've never seen actually a copy of the list. I've only seen summaries. I've heard they will whisper it to me or like send like a carrier pigeon to deliver the message, but it's not, they can't tell us for sure, and maybe some of this work will come out with what the Federal City Council is doing to try to actually say, you've said it's not worth your time, you don't want it, like give it to us or give it to the district, we can do it, we'd be happy to. In that plan, they talked about this hierarchy or spectrum of how NPS would get rid of their holdings. So sort of top is full control, full ownership, full maintenance, and then as we get down the line, it becomes more flexible, or there's less control by NPS and more by a third party. And so what I'm certainly interested in is, you can see that we're close to the bottom with the CMA, but there's still very many challenges that are associated with it, or not as much flexibility, I think, as I would certainly like to have and the bid would like to have. And so there are these other opportunities to explore disposition strategies that I hope become part of this conversation, both with our partners at NPS directly and then through the work with our friends at the Federal City Council. Two more things I would just say to look forward to or to think about. So I think there's tremendous opportunity in small holdings that NPS currently has and is largely lay fallow. So, this is one of my favorites, Reservation 175. I love Reservation 175. It is a small park. It's right at the corner of Massachusetts and 9th, right next to the Carnegie Library, Mount Vernon Square. There's two of them. They're matching on the north side and the south side of K Street. But you have these small. It's a tenth of an acre, or right. It's a little bit more than a tenth of an acre. It's at the entry to downtown. Largely clear, single tree. But you think about these micro uses, these small park uses that NPS just isn't built for maintaining, thinking about, activating. And so, I look at a space like this and think, could this be a great way to leverage and offer seating and dining opportunities for Yardbird? Or could it be like a dog run social club kind of thing? There's also it has a twin to the north of K Street in front of a church. It'd be a great location for a little tot lot and a playground for the daycare center that's in the basement. And so spaces like these, the bid has resources for maintaining. We have capacity to design, entitle, construct, and maintain. And we are certainly interested in exploring partnerships and opportunities with NPS to see how these kinds of spaces can be enlivened. I'll also point out, just with the last minute or so that I have, I hope everyone's aware of or is on their radar is the NCPC Pennsylvania Avenue Initiative, the National Capital Planning Commission. This has been a multi-year process, and the purpose or one of the key goals is to move some of the large-scale events and First Amendment activities off of the mall and onto the hardscape of Pennsylvania Avenue. It's actually incredibly detrimental to the mall to have 250,000 people tromping on it. And so the vision is to relocate the bike lane, put the kind of event infrastructure in the ground. So things like, rather than trucking in a generator for the stage, you just put a transformer in a vault in the street and then just plug in when you need it, right? You could imagine that too with retractable bollards, speaker systems. There's a lot of potential and big thinking that's going in. What's interesting about this is this work is coming out of the legacy of the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation, the PADC. This is a diagram that shows the areas that are under the control of the National Park Service. So it's effectively all of the sidewalks and the large public spaces. So if you can see, you see Freedom Plaza, Market Square, and then John Marshall Park to the east, and then all of the sidewalks. And when the PADC was unwound in '96 through a federal process, NPS got the sidewalks. And so they're a crucial partner, closely involved, but a lot of these questions that at least I'm thinking about, and I think everyone's thinking about, of how are they maintaining and activating these spaces? What kind of monetization opportunities are there? How do we ensure oversight, long-term maintenance, et cetera? This is all NPS land. And so I look at, particularly when thinking about the larger spaces, what they call in the design team's calling the 3 living rooms, which would be Freedom Plaza, Market Square in the middle, and then John Marshall Park to the east. These spaces have incredible opportunity to look at, and I think what we built, or what the bid was able to build and put together at Franklin Park, learn from those lessons and apply them to a much larger and impactful area for the city. So I'm a little over time. Thank you, Shelley. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mark. Okay, now we're going to come on up here for questions. The questions are going to be moderated by Dennis Chestnut, who is co-chair of our the Committee of 100's Parks and Environment Committee here. Dennis is going to lead it off with a couple of questions, and then people will line up over here. Please keep your questions short so we have time for others here. We do have a good group here. I'm sure there'll be a number of people that will have questions. So turn it over to Dennis.
Okay, well, good evening, rather. And thank you very much. The presentations were very interesting. I'm quite sure we're going to have quite a few questions that will come from the audience. So I've created a couple of questions to get the process started. So I'll start off, since you just completed, Mark, I'll start off with a question for you. And there was a area that was developed, one of the recent developed areas, the NOMA area here in D.C. And so the question I have is, one of the situations that developed with NOMA was that they developed it without the focus on including green spaces and park space there, and have attempted to try to add since it's been developed. So the question I have for you is, how can we avoid another NOMA allowing the development of large areas without increased green space?
It's funny. I actually think of NOMA as kind of a success story in a way because of the work that the NOMA Parks Foundation did. And that was actually a bid-led partnership with an associated 501c3 fundraising arm. They were able to raise and deploy over $40 million for capital improvements in NOMA. And I think that of the green spaces that they do have, they work well. I think there's always going to be a challenge and a tension of ensuring and accommodating kind of like enough open space and enough green space. But I'm always excited by, and I'll tell you, I have 2 small kids, 6 and 8, and one of their favorite parks in this city is the Swamp Poodle, right? Swamp Poodle Park, which is a dog park and playground that I believe occupied like a single building lot. I'm like, well, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but yeah, it's like it's sort of like a cage thing, and the kids love it. They love it. They crawl in there, but it's a tiny little footprint. So I think it's active recreation is something that we don't have enough space for, and so I love small interventions like that, and hopefully we can do both.
Thank you. All right. So I have a question for you, Rachel. Is it? Yeah. All right, good. So has there been any significant changes since your report, and has there been any response to the report regarding those changes?
Yes. First of all, there was tremendous community response when the report came out. We heard from a lot of people, we spoke to a lot of people when we were researching for the report, but we didn't reach everyone. And we heard from a lot of people that the report reflected their experience. And even people who reached out were like, I never understood why X was the way it was, and now I understand it. So it was explaining something that people had been living with but didn't really understand, like what was going on to cause the situation. So that was one response, and we were pleased that the report reflected people's experience. I think there are two other things I would raise. One is that Federal City Council launched this DC Neighborhood Parks Project, which is taking a look at how do we reimagine the park system in DC to better meet the needs of residents in all parts of the city, and that resulted in this task force that was convened by Councilmember Fruman, Mayor Tony Williams, and DEMP head Nina Albert, and that's still ongoing. And then in terms of implementing the recommendations, that kind of was a recommendation, is to get everyone together and think about this together holistically. But there has been some modest increased coordination at the district level. So the city administrator's office has started convening on a regular basis agencies that work on parks in DC with NPS in a more regular way. So those are a couple of things that I know about. Becky might know more.
Very good, thank you. Well, Becky, it's good to see you again outside of our convenings. How do you think things would change if DC established an office or Department of Parks?
Well, the first thing is the city needs to get more park land. And would need to find the money to pay for it. Although I do think one thing Joe Sternlieb has been working with us. He used to be at the Georgetown bid. He's been really crunching the numbers on the cost if the city were to get all this federal parkland, or a lot of it. And I think the main takeaway is it is a lot of money, but we can do it. And especially considering that right now the Park Service spends not a lot of money maintaining parks, and kind of like the little pocket park you showed, they're just mowing grass. It can't be that expensive, at least in the short term, to do the same thing, okay? But I think, the Trust for Public Land told us that you will have way less coordination friction if you put everything in one place. I think right now the challenge is like, what comes first? Like, do we wait for all that land to come in and then we create this Parks Department? I like to think we can start now to think through how it would work. I also think that what they're doing at RFK and along the Anacostia is really exciting. And the RFK site, it's 91 acres, it's huge. And that was federal land that has been transferred to the city. It's a great opportunity to start thinking about, like, okay, let's put in place a framework for how the city can run its parks, start there and expand. And not just RFK, along the entire Anacostia riverfront. I know that the city is already thinking about an Anacostia strategy, so why don't we extend that to the whole city?
I think another thing that's come up related to what it would mean to have a parks department, and this came up in the task force conversations a lot, is that right now parks are no one's priority. They're like part of everyone's job, but they're not like their number one job. And so what a lot of people were saying is that, we need to have like a P in DPR again, or I guess we never had one, but really put the P in DPR and have parks be like a top priority. That you're looking at the budget and like, this is the parks budget. Right now we don't really have that in any agency. So just having it like have more eyes on it, have it be higher priority would make a big difference.
Well, since you have the mic, I have one more question for you. Is there an equity issue in DC's current park system from your perspective?
Yes, I started talking about that a little bit in my presentation, is that right now the way funding is allocated leads to pretty significant inequities. The parks in the downtown core have much higher resources than the ones in the rest of the city, and particularly the parks in the eastern half of the city in historically underserved neighborhoods. And then because of this, and I started to touch on this too, because of this underfunding, there's a real, and this is common in the park space all over the country, is there's a real reliance on partnerships, friends of groups, nonprofit partners. And those groups need to raise money, and they need to have the ability to enter into agreement with the city, and that's just going to be easier in neighborhoods that have more resources. And so it means that those neighborhoods have access to better maintained spaces than others. So it does lead to inequities across the system.
Wonderful, thank you. Mark, do you think that it is realistic to expect that the cooperative management agreement for Franklin Park can be replicated elsewhere within well, I know you're focused on the downtown core, but do you think that it can be replicated elsewhere?
Sure. I mean, if the resources are there, right? I think this is crucial point that Rachel makes is I exist, right? And for downtown, and can draw a salary, and we have the resources to do it. But it is it is to run a large urban park has costs. I mean, we spend a lot of money and resources on keeping the park beautiful, and it's good, and it aligns with our mission. But there are many bids, but not every bid is as well-resourced as ours is. And there are certainly areas of the city that have NPS green spaces that don't have a bid to maintain it. I think about in your presentation, Rachel, you had a photo of the playground from Grant Circle, and that's my neighborhood. I've been living in that neighborhood for 10 years now, and there was a decrepit playground, and somebody complained about a safety risk, so the NPS showed up and they said, okay, great, and they just took it away. And that's the end of it. And so, sure, CMA could be a tool, but the challenge is that you need somebody who can sign the agreement and who can perform. The district found us, and again, we're happy to do it, but not everyone has that. And then the second is there's still NPS is still cannot extricate themselves from the park through a CMA. It's still constant, just in terms of capacity, meetings, coordination, emails. I mean, it doesn't actually relieve, from my perspective, it helps with the maintenance, but it doesn't relieve the kind of the burden of actually just paying attention to the thing.
I'm going to ask maybe one or two more questions, but we'll go ahead and begin to have people begin to line up, and we'll begin to take questions. The last question I have is for Becky. And the question is, what do you think are the next steps to achieve better neighborhood parks?
Next steps? Well, I think first we need to get general buy-in from the people that matter. And I think that's people in this room, it's people in the DC government, it's the mayor, it's all the co-chairs of our task force. I sure hope they're gung-ho about what we're doing. I know they are. And the federal government. They've got to agree with us. And I think that we can persuade them. I think that they're nearly there. I mean, even the National Capital. Thank you. No, the Small Parks Plan. Well, in any event, there have been federal reports that have made similar recommendations to what we were saying, which is that it doesn't make sense for the Park Service to run DC neighborhood parks. I think it's just that no one's really focused on this problem and opportunity in the way that we have done in the last year, and that we've done the hard work to do the research, to look at best practices, how are we going to pay for it, and also get the important people in the room.
Okay, well, we'll start with the first question.
Hi, good evening. My name is Yushena Evans. I live by Fort Taunton Station. So I have a particular interest in the Civil War defenses of Washington, which I think are largely ignored by the federal government. I hope they will not be ignored in the task force report because everyone seems surprised. I was at the neighborhood meeting last week with the mayor, and I mentioned the unexploded ordinances that have been found in Fort Taunton Park, and she said she knew nothing of it. There have been media reports since about 2020. I've been writing about it on my neighborhood blog. And so I'm just curious if the task force does recognize this big problem in the Fort Taunton community. I'm wondering if there is a mechanism for district government to weigh in on MPS policy, for example, with respect to the general management plan. Has that been done? And then generally, I would like to know, how can we get the city officials, mayor's office, council's office, to work together to address the fact that we have unexploded ordinances in Fort Taunton Park and everyone is ignoring it?
I can speak to some of it. I'm aware, I'm a Ward 5 neighbor, and aware of the issues that you are raising. I think that I'm not sure whether the district government is weighing in officially on the management plan. I'd imagine that they do, but I don't know what that process looks like. If OP does anything, maybe if anyone here knows more, please speak up. But I do think there's a little bit of the way it's worked in the past is the city officials are like, oh, that's not ours, that's not our responsibility. And it's sort of like easier to just say, oh, like there's nothing we can do, like that's federal land and like not our problem. And I feel like this is a pretty good example of that, and I've seen it in a lot of other cases. We on the task force haven't been looking at that site specifically. We've been looking at like the whole city and thinking about what parks would make sense to be under greater local control. The Civil War defenses are a particularly difficult one because they have these historic resources. So we want to think about some management model where we can appropriately preserve those and make sure they're safe, but then there's a lot of unrealized potential, as you know, around those sites as well. So yeah, definitely something we've been looking at.
Ricky Kramer. I am actually at the moment an ANC commissioner in Southwest, so I'm very familiar with the tension and difficulties between a lot of federal land and decisions made that should be made in the city. I'm also by the district. I'm also struck by something that was, so I appreciate all of your presentations, and they ring true. But I'm wondering whether something needs to be stressed much more explicitly and sort of rise to the top in terms of keeping public parks public. I'm struck by it from the current situation in the White House East Wing all the way down to what we're talking about. So I guess what I'm feeling is it may not be sufficient to simply say we ought to have partnerships, we ought to have these kinds of things, that there has to be some kind of articulation which is very strong at the time. I also think of the other examples, the recent conflict in Bryant Park between concessions and what the park actually is responsible for maintaining. And it seems to me that has to govern everything that's done, whether it's done by the bids or partnerships with the other kinds of supervisory structures, et cetera. So if any of you could speak to that a little bit more, that would be helpful.
So, yes, more money for parks, absolutely. And keeping them public and accessible is very important. I do think that there are real challenges in the costs that come along with maintaining these spaces, and you know, and even, I mean, you think about like MPS utilizing, you know, concessionaires on the mall, right? I mean, there's ways in which these can offer services and like enhance the park experience through a kind of like, you know, semi-private framework. But I do think that, you know, one thing that I was thinking about what Becky, you had said was, you know, this idea like, of course we can do it. And sometimes I think about like the funding question as one that's actually like tied to home rule. Like if we want to be a state, you know, we have to be able to like maintain our parks and like have a park system in place. And we have a very special relationship with the federal government, but at the end of the day, you know, we will become the 51st state one day. At that point, we will have to have the infrastructure in place to maintain and keep these parks publicly accessible.
Thank you for your presentations. Sylvia Cabas from Georgetown University. I'm interested in hearing from the panelists about a significant actor in the equity game that hasn't come up in tonight's presentation, which is the education sector, both DC public schools and private entities. I'm thinking of two specific examples, the controversy around Jella Field in Georgetown, where a private school had priority access to a public asset, and also the general phenomenon throughout the district of schools and parks co-located and co-named, but DC public schools unable to access those parks. In my neighborhood, my son went to Amadon Elementary School, but Amadon could not use Amadon Field, which is in the same block, for non-sports events like their annual carnival. So I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts. Thank you.
I can speak to that a little bit. I think it's a good example of, and I didn't even mention DCPS, but I should, if I listed all the agencies involved in the DC side, that's certainly one of them. They control and manage a lot of our recreation space in the city. And I think and as you've alluded to, kind of get to decide whether or not it is publicly accessible. But the root of that problem is that we don't currently have enough space for the recreation needs of the city. And so it has to be pretty tightly controlled. And, you know, like it means that fields don't have like general access hours and like they get used up by sports leagues and we just don't have enough because we're using this kind of small percentage of the current park space. And so I do think bringing more space under local control and available for those kinds of uses would relieve a little bit of that pressure. So it speaks to part of your question, at least, hopefully.
Well, that was such a great question. I actually flew in from Hartford, Connecticut this morning for the Olmsted Conference, which had a reception here. And the reason why I'm here is because I actually know Dennis from his work with Groundworks Trust and the tributaries. And what I'm experiencing in Hartford, very similar to some of these things, like there's, how do you balance the money for entertainment, you know, the dog parks and athletic fields, often synthetic turf, often not very healthy, right? With the fact that really what we've found in the research we've done on a 9-element plan, the watershed management plan, is that these riparian streams need to be conserved. And the larger the area of nature that's conserved and it's untouched, intact, and mature, able to mature, the healthier it is, right? And so you had brought up, Rachel had brought up the public health issue, but the money issue is really not behind those sort of larger scale efforts to, say, improve water quality in the farther away neighborhoods, but also keep those pockets of nature that breathe real air quality and shade into the city. Because your kids want to play, or they need a dog park, right? So how is that going to get balanced in this new system?
So a priority of our work was always the parks as parks, right? Not turning them into something else. And that's true of the task force as well. And the downtown bid, it's like, we don't want to turn these into not parks. We want them to be great parks. And natural areas are a really important part of that for all the reasons you mentioned, the health benefits and the environmental benefits. And I think that we'd want to keep the same types of uses, even if land was transferred. So the really big natural areas, we'd want to maintain them as natural areas. But I'd still say that there would be a benefit to local control, because right now, NPS does not actually have the funding to maintain the natural areas. So they can't do land conservation and take care of the resources. And the DC government actually is doing most of that work. Like the Department of Energy and Environment is doing the stream restorations on NPS land, and DC is going out and getting the money to do it, but has to like work with NPS to get it done. So I'd actually argue that our vision includes greater stewardship, improved stewardship of natural areas.
So the funding streams would still be like WASA, the Stormwater Authority, the bids, the fundings. Somebody would be in control of a whole variety of funding that would maintain habitat and as well as athletic fields and historic structures. Thank you. It's a great conference.
Hi. This is sort of a similar issue. In a lot of the, especially contiguous parks like Shepherd Parkway and some of the places in Savannah, Georgia, the respite from heat, things like that are, a deliberate part of that plan. I wondered if, oh, sorry, I'm a little too short. Sorry. Okay, thank you. Has there been, like, if you prepare guidance for are you planning to prepare guidance for these parks and, encourage the good land management in terms of use of chemicals and so the plant palette, things like that, and just encouraging, like, respite from the heat? That's one of the big things. I know when I bring friends downtown in the summer, I introduce them to the shade hopping sort of concept of getting around the city. So, yeah, I assume you're developing some kind of guidance, like general guidance, and I wondered if you were thinking about things like that.
I think that would be a good idea to develop in the future. Yeah, you are raising another, there are so many issues that there wasn't enough time. You bring up another issue, which is trees, which is right now, obviously tree planting is a big part of our city's climate plan, and we don't do, I'm hoping I'm getting this right, but you can call me out. We don't do significant tree plantings on NPS land right now. That's not like we don't really do that. And so that would also unlock more space to plant trees if they were more under local control. I'm talking to you. Yeah.
Just as a note about kind of design, and this all predated me for the work of the design of Franklin Park, but I think that actually was like a success in terms of having, because I had to go through a NEPA process as like federal property, and had very thoughtful design teams, and as I understand, a very collaborative working environment, like with the NPS staff, with district staff, that to me is like creates those kinds of design questions are good opportunities to leverage NPS's experience and knowledge, right? Because they have, I will say, I know the name has been coming up a lot, but like great folks, like very mission aligned, and I meet a lot of people there who I think have so much on their plate and are just under-resourced, but super well-intentioned. And so if you get those people in a room, you're like, hey, like, how should we think about plant materials, right? Like, they're gonna be knowledgeable and passionate, and I think that kind of input is always helpful.
Hi, I'm Claudia Russell, member of this Committee of 100. I have a question, but I have to start with a little bit of a comment as I develop the question. But we've been talking about parks, which are often in our minds green, respite. They give you the opportunity to think. You're not always activated and recreating. And it seems like the lines are blurred to me. And I think our Lincoln Park is a wonderful example where it's not programmed per se, but it is a park of history, of monument. It gives an opportunity for people to have an identity in that area, but it's not programmed, and it's wonderful. And I have a sense, just being a resident in Washington and being interested in this, that we like to program parks, and they always have to have a mission, you know, a dog park, a top plot, you know, a baseball diamond. But the reality is that many people just need respite from their lives. And a beautifully designed park or a park that has meaning in their neighborhood becomes their living room. You mentioned living room parks. And my question is, where is that thinking of the living room park where people can have a neighborhood gathering and not be programmed? I'm sorry. Okay, I'm terribly sorry. Oh, it was a good question.
I mean, I can summarize it briefly. It was a question about where do sort of less activated parks fit into this vision, or unprogrammed spaces. And I think that's really important. I think what we were getting at when we're thinking about, like, we need to have a statement of purpose, a holistic view of the park system, is that everything kind of has a place, and there needs to be, like, places that have lots of events, you know, and, like, those might be the downtown parks. But even downtown, you want spaces for respite, especially if people are going to live here. Right now, there really aren't spaces for that. And that a lot of these little parks could just be better maintained, more welcoming, and just places for people to come together, see each other, and that's what they're for. So it's that, you know, we have all these spaces across the city, they all could serve different functions, but right now we're not really looking at them as a whole and what should be what.
And I would just say, I think that more local control would actually contribute to that, being able to have more local control of the parks.
Good evening. My name is John Henderson. I'm with Green Spaces for DC. I'm also a member of the Neighborhood Parks Task Force. My question is regarding how to improve communications. The issue was laid out by you, Rachel. The 6 National Park Service divisions, and then the 2 departments in the District of Columbia. One thing that wasn't mentioned is that those 2 DC departments report to different deputy mayors, and so they don't even communicate well between themselves. So there was a lot of discussion at the task force about community managed parks, and the organization that I helped to found, we work a lot with volunteers. And so if you're working with volunteers in any capacity, you have to have clear communication. And right now, with all of these silos, it's impossible for anyone to understand who to talk to, how to get resources. And if you are going to do a community managed park system, which does work in other cities, you have to have that technical assistance from the park system itself. So how can we improve that?
Well, are you speaking more towards basically how disjointed it is in the DC government? You don't know who to talk to, and they're not talking to each other?
I'm sorry?
So are you talking about sort of the difficulty in communicating with the various DC agencies that are involved in parks?
So first of all, you have to understand, you know, which of the agencies is in charge of the park,
right,
and whatever service that you need or technical, you know, who do you talk to within that agency? And right now, it's impossible. There is
absolutely right. That's a
so
huge problem.
In the short term, how can you improve it?
In the short term, before we create a centralized park agency, I mean, I'm sure that, you know, I hope. I mean, we are not in the DC government. But I think at a minimum they could create a web page that just says, and not just who to contact when there's a problem at the park, but who owns which park right now, right? Because most of the time it's the federal government and the National Park Service, not the DC government. So, but it'd be nice if there was a place where DC residents can go and be like, this is where I just figure out those details right here, this website. And I don't think that exists. It doesn't.
Hi, my name is Meg McGuire, and I want to really thank you for how much analysis you've done of the current conditions, of the problems, and of the potential solutions. But I'd also really like to encourage you to now lift that up into a really dynamic vision. Right now, we are starved for vision. We are all stuck in this god-awful mess of a federal government, and we need vision. And you can take this to the next step, and you can look at a continuum going from these very natural areas all the way up to how to animate plazas like the one that's right here, and really lay out a dynamic thing that is based on what you know we all want and desperately need, and then take it to these rich billionaires and say, put your damn money where your mouth is. Let's make this country really something. Not a question, but a need.
No, it'd be great if Jeff Bezos just said, do you want $1 billion? I mean, I think we would take it. But I would also say that philanthropy, you should always pursue philanthropy, but nationwide, generally, park spending, philanthropy is just 1% to 2% of all spending. So it's almost never, a really serious portion of park funding. Like, it has to come from taxes and cost recovery.
Hello, I'm Faith Wheeler, part of the Committee of 100 as well. Is that louder? Is that better? Can you hear back there? Okay. All right. I'm wondering about how the parks in the future can better coordinate perhaps with early childhood development and with schools or preschool, actually, from 0 to 3, which is a very strong development period for children. And something that I think we really need to focus on well in this city, much more than we have already. And we now have free schools from 3-year-olds on up, which is a big advantage, big step forward. But that early childhood development, I think, can really use a lot of help and support and creativity that I see up here. And so I'd like just to wonder if there is some thinking in that direction now. Another topic, quick, is, are you also thinking about summer heat in the parks and prolonged summer heat? And as the gentleman was interested in trees, that's one way to help. Shade trees. So those two things, early childhood development and dealing with summer heat, providing shade and cool spaces for respite.
I mean, I'll say as a parent of young children, I would like DPR to create some guidelines on how to design playgrounds for summer, because right now shade structures do not seem to be, there's a little bit, but we could definitely use a lot more, and think about these spaces and how it just keeps getting hotter and how we need to make them visible and safe in the summer. And then I also love your point about early childhood, that parks should be a part of that vision, getting kids out into the parks and using them as a resource. And I think that, I'm just going to keep bringing it back to this message that having more district parks would permit some of that, because right now it can be hard to use federal parks for those kinds of programming. That's another kind of programming, right? Like educational programming.
At the other end of the spectrum, I would like to talk about seniors. I'm here representing Capitol Hill Village, an organization of 450 seniors in the greater Capitol Hill area. We're very active in a lot of areas, and we have tried to influence DPR to take seniors into account when they do new parks. I don't know how many of you are familiar with a document DPR produced a couple years ago called Ready to Play. But we, several of us in the village, spent many hours going over that very long document, making recommendations, most of which were accepted. However, nothing has happened, absolutely nothing. We have specific recommendations for things that seniors would like to see in parks. Seniors can use parks when kids are in school, and that would be a much greater efficient use of the parks than having them be empty, which most of them are most of the day. So if anybody wants a list of things that seniors would like to have provided in these parks, I could certainly provide that.
Benches. Okay, so I guess I'm the last person. Hi. Here, I have a question. And I was very excited to see the Franklin Park on the cover of the ad. I'm not sure everybody realizes that the advertisement was Franklin Park. So that was the first CMA, the first agreement of its kind. And again, Franklin Park was on the cover, so I guess it's considered a success. So I'm wondering what the next steps would be to work within that framework and to continue to do that. And I know you you asked that question, but I think that maybe we should build on this success and the momentum from it right now when the government goes back. So I guess that's a question. It could be a question, and the CMA doesn't have to be with the bid, right? So it could be with other groups, like you mentioned, Grant Circle.
Okay. And we're...
Oh, good.
Yeah, I mean, totally. It's very much an improvement over what the status quo was, and I think and we certainly have learned a lot at the bid, and I think we can continue to improve upon it. I think, and Franklin Park is unique in just given like the size, the scale, the prominence. It makes a lot of sense for that park, and when having a partner like the bid. I don't quite know if it would be the same for like a smaller parcel that maybe doesn't have the same, isn't as mission aligned with NPS's goal, right? For some of these like smaller, like leftover, like pocket park spaces. And I think that's, there's certainly like incredibly important monumental sites that need to be preserved and absolutely should reside under the purview of NPS. It's absolutely totally appropriate, and as the district, we are the capital of the country, and we should have that kind of heft and weight. I think it's, when I think about like that little reservation like 175, there's...
I think they have a partnership.
Yeah.
That corner, I think they
Right. And there are... Right, and I think we should continue to explore like other opportunities like that, Yeah. PPA.
Okay. This will be the last question, and we'll be able to have some other discussions with the individuals.
I just wanted to add a little bit of info here. There's the Ready to Play master plan, list all the parks who belongs to what. Just like we had already that on when in DPR. DPR had that on. So it was identified. I just like letting you know, like that is already done because it was identified as a problem. Like people, but at the end of the day, I think citizens don't care about who owns what. Yeah. It cares about what happens in the park and how to maintain it. One equity problem was actually what you mentioned, the difficulties for some neighborhood or wards to get partnerships to maintain the parks. So there is a recognition in the government that the private sector and the communities are very important for the maintenance of the parks, and is like key for equity in parks. There is a lot of intention, like it sounded a little bit, and I'm a public servant myself for many agencies, many cities too, in different countries. And it sounded like you presented that there are no planners or there are no people working. Sometimes, yes, it takes time. And there are different projects and different plans trying to address these same spaces. It just takes time, as Mark said. It takes a lot of will. It takes a lot of communities mentioning, like participating, and people in the government love what they are doing, I can say, and you know that we love it. And I just wanted to let you know that maybe we need to focus on one priority at a time. Like you said, it's just maybe we start with a website, maybe we separate DPR from recreation from parks. I agree, we identify that. Maybe we need more money for land acquisition. There is no money for land acquisition. So the part of increasing parks, how you do it without that pocket of money. DPR has a lot of money, DPR and DGS has a lot of money for renovations, but zero money for land acquisition. And DGS has a lot of land, zero for parks. They don't even, they build buildings. It's a lot of building, but just wanted to just provide that information. And maybe an idea for the private sector is to present that prioritization, because of course, my experience in the government is that the prioritization is very difficult because you are pulling too many sides. And then the budgeting is also complicated because the budgets are more general. And then when you present the budget to the communities, it's like, why we have 5 million versus 20 million in another side. So maybe that private sector can help. I don't know if you have thought about that.
Yes, thank you.
Cover that question.
Okay. Well, that was our final statement for the evening, and we would like to thank our guests again. Give them a round of applause. Okay, and I'll turn it back over to Shelley.
Well, thank you. Thank you for Dennis for moderating the questions. Thank you for everybody for coming. Please join us for refreshments out in the lobby. And once again, if any of you have any questions about the Committee of 100, those of the members here have these tags on like I do. So feel free to ask us any questions you might have. So thank you.